So far, we've changed the parameters for text in a 2D way, but we can also use a new 3D parameter. To find out how we can use this, let's check out composition number 5, Ring of Fire. This composition is very simply a movie with a ring of fire with some text above it. I know that by turning on the 3D property for my text, I make the layer 3D. That means that I can transform it in the 3D environment. However, like blur, I may want to do more than just affect the entire layer. With blur, we know that we can apply an effect that blurs the whole layer, but it's much better to be able to affect each individual character. Well, in After Effects CS3, we have the ability to change the 3D transformations on a per character basis. To see this, let's open up the parameters for our text layer. Underneath Animate, we can enable per character 3D. Now when we do this, After Effects will change the icon in our switches column. Rather than having the straightforward 3D cube, we now have two little 3D cubes. This indicates that not only is our layer 3D, but each character in our text phrase has 3D transformation potential. Now if we animate many of the transformation properties, we'll see that they have 3 values rather than just 2 values. If I click to add all transformation properties, we will get all of these, anchor point all the way through to opacity. Here in our new range selector, we can see that our anchor point has 3 dimensions, as does position and scale. Our skew and our skew axis are still controlled by the same number of properties as we see in 2 dimensions. The same is true with opacity, of course, because that is only 1-dimensional. However, we now have X, Y, and Z rotation to govern the rotation of the individual characters. If we deselect all of these, then simply modify the Y rotation by clicking and dragging, we can see the effect this has over each of the characters in our source text. We'll undo that, then modify the Z rotation. The Z rotation is exactly the same as it is in 2D. If we change the anchor point Z value or change the position Z value, we're actually moving those fonts in 3D space. If we simply click and drag to modify the X rotation and the Y rotation, you can see the 3D rotations that are occurring on the text. However, if we navigate back up to the top of our layer, then turn off the switch for per character 3D, as it does for 3D layers, After Effects is simply going to delete all of the values it doesn't understand in 2 dimensions. Let's twirl the options for the text up and go ahead and delete the entire animator. If we select this layer, then turn on the visibility for our masks by clicking on the icon at the bottom of the comp window, you can see that there's a mask already attached to this layer. If we go into our path options for text, we can apply the text directly to the path by selecting that mask in the path pull-down. With it selected, I have all of the different options available to me as I would for any other path text. I can reverse the path by turning this on or off here, and of course I can change the first or last margin. But rather than simply animating this along the path, I'll close up my path options, then enable the per character 3D under Animate, and then again go into Animate and choose Rotation. In this range selector, we're going to offset the 3D rotation of the characters. Remember that where the characters are attached to the spline is going to be where they rotate. So if I modify the X rotation by simply clicking and dragging, I can see the characters rotate away from camera. So I'll change the X rotation to a value of positive 90. Then I'll come down to the transformations for the entire layer. Remember that this is a 3D layer, and as such, I can rotate the entire layer in 3D space. I don't want to change the rotation. I want to change the orientation for the attitude of the 3D layer. So I'll change the value for orientation to a negative 90 value. If I click and drag to the left, I can see the rotation changing for the entire layer, tilting up and revealing all of the 3D text as it sits on the mask path. I'll change this to a value of 270. That's 360 minus the 90 degrees that I used for the 3D text. Now, if I want to animate the X rotation, I can do that here for the entire 3D layer. I could also either animate the Z rotation, making the ring move around its axis, or change the values for the margins in the properties for the text. Either way, it'll make the text look as though it's spinning in space around a circular path. First, we'll just click and drag on the Z rotation to see what that looks like. We'll undo that, then navigate up to our path options for text. With our path options for text open, we can animate the first margin. Both are similar but not the same, and you might use either or both together to get an animation that you want. To see that this is truly in 3D space, let's unshide the layer that's already created in this composition, called 3D. We'll turn off the flame loop so that we can see that the characters in our white text pass in front of and behind the characters for 3D. We'll open up the rotation value, then simply modify the Z rotation. First they're in front of it, then they're behind the new text, which is only 3D and doesn't have per character 3D enabled. This per character value works completely in the 3D environment, not only with other layers that are in 3D, but with cameras and lights as well. To see this, let's switch over to composition number 6 called Ashes.